What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
A tremendous Friday to each and every one of you listening out there in the EWTN radio listening audience. You have stumbled upon Called to Communion, or perhaps you have intentionally landed on Called to Communion. Whatever is the case, we are asking that question again. What is stopping you from becoming a Catholic? If you'd like to be on the program, the number is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're outside the United States and Canada, God is still calling you into a relationship with himself. And your number is 1-205-271-2985. And we will put you straight to the front of the line at 1-205-271-2985. You can send us an email, openline@ewtn.com. You know what? Or you could even send one to Call to Communion, ctc@ewtn.com. Boy, what did I tell you at the beginning of the show? Didn't I tell you I was a creature of habit?
I was kind of asleep at the switch, actually, when you did that. And all of a sudden I woke up and I was like, what?
I am a creature of habit. ctc@ewtn.com. If you send an email to Dr. Anders at Open Line, then we'll get it to him.
Subject line, wake up, Jack.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. CTC, Michael Birchfield, is frenetically waving his arms as if I had just launched a nuclear missile.
Well, I got one better. A producer who will not be named once ran the Open Line theme music
to start Call to Communion.
To start Call to Communion. Yeah.
That's got to give you a bit of a
a blast from the past.
Well, you were talking before the program about you were driving in one day and perfectly on time, and there was a promo for your show that played, and it had the theme music, and you thought they had started the show without
I
you.
about went out the roof of my car thinking they've run the show without me.
Anyway, ctc@ewtn.com. You can also text your question to Dr. Anders. Text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for a response. Text your first name and your question message, and data rates may apply. I am, Jack Williams, very inadequately filling the shoes of Tom Price today on his birthday. Say a little prayer for Tom Price as he celebrates his 39th birthday tonight and today. I don't know, for the 20th time probably, but who's counting?
You think he's listening?
I think he is.
He probably
I think
is.
he probably is.
Happy birthday, Tom.
Happy birthday, Tom. We're thinking about you. We prayed for you this morning. Our listeners are praying for you now. It's going to be a great day.
They're praying you come back soon.
That's exactly right. Yeah, ain't no doubt about that.
No, you're doing great, Jack. We appreciate you a lot.
EWTN. Remember when you were in school, and of course with you, you may have been the student, but there was always the student that was so intuitive and so intelligent that they had their hand up before the question was even out of the teacher's mouth.
Yeah, I know that. I know that student.
Yeah, well, we have that student on the line with us now because Becca called in with a question for you. Before we even got the show underway, Becca was in line, ready for this question. She's in Phoenix, Arizona, listening on the EWTN app. Becca, you are the student of the day. What's your question for Dr. Anders?
Hi, thank you guys for taking my call. I have a family member who considers themselves a deist and that they believe in God, but they don't believe in Jesus or any of other organized religion. And I asked them, if I had a book or a resource for you to look into the Catholic faith, would you read it? And they said yes. And so I was wondering what you guys would recommend.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So, when I was kind of getting my head around this question, because my call screener gives me a summary of what's going to be asked. And so my first thoughts were, okay, how do I respond to a deist? And the description that you gave of your family member's belief is ambiguous between deism and theism, right? Because they're not the same thing. And so I initially formulated my answer as a response to deism. And let me tell you what I mean by that. And my answer may still be helpful in any case. A deist is a person who believes that there is a supreme being, like an architect, who set up the world and then kind of stepped back and lets it go. And this was kind of a model for understanding God's relationship to the world that was current during the Enlightenment, during the scientific revolution, kind of modeled after, Newton sort of conceived of the universe like a giant, piece of clockwork in a mechanistic kind of way. It seemed like a good way to conceptualize God's relationship to the world, like that of a watchmaker who kind of winds up the watch and then sets it aside and lets it go. And that's not what a theist is. A theist is just somebody that believes in God, and that could fit any number of descriptions. But what Catholics mean by God is not compatible with deism, because we think that God's active in the world at every moment. And so that's an important step to Catholic faith, all right? If you can understand that the deistic conception of the world, it doesn't even work. I mean, it doesn't work as a theory of God. I mean, if there is a God that is the first source, the primary source, the first cause from which all things proceed, then the necessity of there being anything at all derives ultimately from God and not from creatures. So the idea that if there's a God at all, the idea of God not being connected to his creation in an interactive way doesn't make a lot of sense. And the best book that I know of to show you why deism is wrong and why, if there is a God, it must be a God who's intimately connected to every act of the created world, the best book that would speak to that particular concern is by David Bentley Hart, and the title of the book is The Experience of God. And it's really going to get at the question, what do Catholics and other traditional believers, not just Catholics, Protestants, even Jews and Muslims, what do they mean by the word God? And how should we think about that philosophically and God's relationship to the world? And that's a great book on that topic, and I would really recommend it. In terms of, how do you get from the being of God, like all the way to the truth of Christian faith, okay? Well, there are a lot of ways we can handle that. And it a little bit depends on the temperament of the person that I'm talking to. Obviously, the most important proof of the truth of the Christian religion is the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. The resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And there are lots of books that treat the reality of Christ's resurrection. The theologian N.T. Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, has a very lengthy study called The Resurrection of the Son of God, which is probably the most important treatment of that topic. There are much shorter treatments. There are some summary statements of his position that he himself has written in essay form that are largely available on the internet and easily searchable. I mean, you could just look up Resurrection of Jesus, N.T. Wright, essay, summary, something like that, and you'd get, maybe 10-page essay. But his book is, of course, a pretty extensive treatment of that topic. That's one way into that subject. There are many, many more. I think that many of the things that modern secular people take for granted as values, and perhaps your friend is one of these, like the conception of rationality that he has that would make sense of the idea of deism, maybe some of his ethical values about human rights and human dignity, these kinds of things. They're not always realizing the extent to which it is the Catholic Church that gave them these values. And the influence of Catholicism on world history for good is yet another evidence of the spiritual power and truth of the faith. A good book on that angle would be Tom Wood's book entitled How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization. Another angle would be the angle of the fulfillment of prophecy. There's a 3-volume work called The Mystery of Israel and the Church by the Catholic theologian Lawrence Feingold. I can do this all day, by the way. So if I had a little bit more information on his particular objections, I could tailor my recommendations. But resurrection of Jesus, influence of the church on world history, fulfillment of prophecy, the doctrine of God. I mean, we can do this all day long.
God bless you, Becca. We hope that's helpful to you. We're just getting started here on EWTN's Call to Communion. The number to be on the program, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
Sharing the fullness of the Catholic faith. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986. This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Get ready to pack your bags. Now is the time to make your plans for the 2018 EWTN Family Celebration. Saturday, November 3rd is the time, and Jacksonville, Florida is the place. This is your chance to meet your favorite Catholic TV and radio hosts. We'll have Holy Mass and Confession, Family Corner, and you can shop for holy reminders at EWTN Religious Catalog. The EWTN Family Celebration. For more information, go to EWTN.com/Family Celebration.
Christ is the answer, with Father John Riccardo.
Maybe we need to ask ourselves, do we really know Jesus? Maybe another way to ask that would be, how familiar are you with the Gospels? When I was living in D.C., I was on the plane taking a late flight home, sitting next to a young girl. She was probably 16, 17. I had my collar on, and we got talking, and she said somehow in the course of the conversation, she acknowledged that she was running away from home and was in the midst of an awful lot of difficulties that were going on. Her story seemed to be remarkably akin to the story of the prodigal son, which we just heard this past Sunday at Mass, huh? And so I started to speak a little bit about that with her. And I said, you sound a little bit like the younger son in the story of the prodigal son. And she looked at me like I was from Mars. And I said, are you not familiar with the story of the prodigal son? And she says, no, never heard it. And I just looked at her, I says, oh my goodness, are you in for a wonderful evening?
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986.
833-288-3986. That's 833-288-EWTN. A couple of lines open for you. Next stop for us is Columbus, Ohio. Braden is in Columbus, listening to our tremendous affiliate there, St. Gabriel Radio. Braden, thanks for holding. You're on with Dr. Anders.
Thank you guys for taking my call. I guess the issue that I'm having is I'm a Protestant currently, but I did take the steps to start RCIA, and my wife, however, is not taking that very well. We come from an apostolic Pentecostal church. I'm not sure what the difference is when they're apostolic, but she received the gift of speaking in tongues, or it says she did. I don't want to question whether or not God gave her that gift, but she feels that by doing this, I guess, betraying her and dividing our family, and I'm not really sure how to take that, because I feel the complete opposite way. I told her that I feel like this is where God's leading me into the Catholic faith. Nobody persuaded me to go there or tried to talk me into it. It's just I felt drawn to it, and she believes that our family is drawn to the Pentecostal faith.
Braden, thank you very much, and I'm sorry for your struggles. And I have been there, and I have done that, as they say. So I walked the same walk with my wife in my conversion to the Catholic faith. There's a happy ending to that story. Today, my wife is, as they say, more Catholic than the Pope. Purely a metaphor. But and we
wasn't a really smooth highway the whole trip, though, was it?
It was not a smooth highway. It was not a smooth highway on the way in. So I'm sympathetic. And your situation is not unique. It's not unique at all. So what is my counsel? So first of all, if you are persuaded in conscience that the Catholic Church is the church that Christ founded, and that it is disobedience to remain outside the Catholic Church, then you are conscience bound. You are duty bound in conscience to enter the Catholic Church. You are not bound to enter it tomorrow. But if you're persuaded that the Church is founded by Christ and that He desires the unity of all Christians in the visible Catholic Church, then you've got to become Catholic. But you don't have to do it tomorrow. And you also don't have to do it in a way that exacerbates your wife's sense of betrayal, of threat, of fear. And you are allowed to be, in fact, you ought to be pastorally sensitive to her needs, to her conscience. So I can't tell you, you should do it next month, you should do it in 6 months, you should do it in a year. I can tell you that you need to form the positive intention to enter the church and probably give yourself a deadline, but it doesn't have to be tomorrow. And you can discuss that with your wife, or not, as is whatever seems prudent given the circumstances. So that's the first point. Secondly, I don't think you can do better than this in having this conversation. Martin Luther, the founder of Protestantism, once said that his conscience was held captive to the Word of God, and to disobey conscience is neither right nor safe. And even though I believe Luther's conscience was poorly formed and he made the wrong decision, he was not wrong to appeal to conscience. That's a Catholic principle. Conscience compels. And I think at the very least, at some point, you need to lay it on the line and say, this is for me a matter of conscience. And if I don't follow my conscience, I will believe myself to be in disobedience to God. If I believe myself to be in disobedience to God, there is no way that I can function effectively as a spiritual leader in my family or even as a good spouse to you, because I will have a divided mind or I'll be a hypocrite. And you don't want a hypocrite as a husband. It's more important to you that you should have a husband who is committed in moral integrity, all right, and to his conscience, than one that is outwardly in conformity with you about religious matters, but inwardly is not in agreement. That doesn't work, okay? I am not telling you that you have to become Catholic. You are imposing that obligation on me. All right? I regard the dignity of your conscience. You need to grant me the same dignity. It is unfortunate that we do not presently see eye to eye on this matter. I love you. That is a cross. I will bear many crosses, many hardships in order to serve you as a husband and to love you and to put your needs before my own, but not before God. I think that, Pope Paul VI said that the world listens more to witnesses than to teachers. Wives strike me as often being miraculously immune to the reasons that their husbands bring for their behavior. They're more interested in the behavior. So I don't know what kind of relationship you have. I don't know how theologically you discuss the faith. But whatever the answer to that question is, I think it is exceedingly important that you excel in charity, and that you make that a reason for your entrance into the Catholic Church, that a confession of fault. Here are things I've done wrong. Here are things I've done badly. Here are places where I have failed you as a husband. I don't want to fail you in that way anymore. I want to do better. I want to become heroic in charity and in humility and in faithfulness and in kindness and gentleness and in hungering and thirsting for righteousness. This is part of what motivates me to become a Catholic, so that I can be a better husband, a better father, a better servant leader, one more willing to bear the cross. And then put your money where your mouth is and lead with your heart in that matter. And then you may have to endure the painful difficulty of a divided home for a time. And my wife didn't follow me immediately into the Catholic Church. I came into the church in 2003. Really, it was 2008 before she was with me in spirit. She was with me in body for a little while, but not in spirit. And I would have just assumed, without the spirit, the body's not good for much. Honestly, it was her bodily presence with me in Mass was sometimes more difficult than her bodily absence would have been, because, you know, there's a way you can go to Mass with a snide look and a sneer and a condescension and an unwillingness to participate and a demonstrative refusal to partake of what's being offered. And I'm not just talking about Holy Communion, but the whole thing, the whole shooting match, you know. That's very threatening to the kids. That's very difficult for the children, you know. I'd rather have the Spirit. And it took 5 years in my case. Some people, you know, endure a divided home for their entire married life. But I think it's incredibly important to reaffirm, absolutely without condition, I'm here until I die to be the best husband to you that I can possibly be. To do that, I got to follow my conscience.
You know, Father Wade Menezes, the great Father of Mercy, who married my lovely wife and I.
Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
And,
that I did not know.
During his homily, and I've heard him say this before, but he was giving various definitions he had heard over the years of marriage. And the best definition, my favorite, that he gave during our wedding, and I've heard him, as I said, say it before, is marriage is one man and one woman who absolutely refuse to give up on one another.
Burn your parachute. Burn your
right.
parachute. As a Pentecostal pastor I knew once said. It may be of some use to you, Braden. I recently wrote a book about my experience going through what you're going through, and I called it The Catholic Church Saved My Marriage, and it's available at the EWTN Religious Catalog. You might find it helpful.
50 years ago this month, Paul VI issued his courageous encyclical Humanae Vitae. And this week on Register Radio, we continue our anniversary coverage of the legacy of the papal teaching with Father Raymond D'Souza and Christian Bruger. Both of them join Jeanette DeMello and Matthew Bunson on Register Radio this Saturday night, 7 o'clock Eastern Time on EWTN Radio. We head to the Republic of Texas. Megan is in Dallas listening on Guadalupe Radio. Megan, you're on with Dr. David Anders.
Okay, hi, Dr. Anders. So first, I do have a question, but I want to say that I'm almost done with your new book that you were just talking about, The Catholic Church Saved My Marriage, and it has been fantastic. And I'm not even married, and I just totally loved it, and it was a page-turner, really honest and interesting, and I just hope everybody listening reads it because it's amazing. So
thank you.
Okay,
I really
so I
appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for writing it. It was really amazing to read. So my question is that I heard yesterday in the homily that theology begins where philosophy ends and that faith begins where reason ends. And I don't know if I guess those things are true. And I also heard something about Kierkegaard and the idea of making a leap of faith. So the specific question is, should reason lead you to a point of, I should believe, but then there's sort of a gap between reason and faith that needs to be crossed by a leap of faith?
Thank you. I really appreciate the question. It's a very important one. And that is not a Catholic way of conceiving of the relationship of faith to reason. Okay, so that's not how the idea of a leap of faith is, as you correctly point out, a Kierkegaardian notion. This is kind of the bedrock of existentialism. It's not consistent with the way that that Catholics have historically understood the relationship. I've got a couple minutes. Let me see if I can unpack this for you. So what does the Catholic faith teach? First of all, it teaches that reason can with certainty know many things about the divine nature. I mean, this is Book of Romans says that, chapter 1, that there are many things about God that can be plainly seen through what he has made. Many things that can be known about God from the natural order, from reason. Many things, about the nature of the moral life. Many things about the nature of the soul. And even perhaps we might venture to say, and I don't want to push this too hard, but that our need for a mediator between God and man is something we can also discern from natural reason. And part of my evidence for that is when you study the history of religions, not just the history of Christianity, you find so many mythic depictions of precisely such a figure, right? Somebody who's willing to lay down their life in obedience to God on behalf of God's people, and to function in kind of a prophetic or priestly or mediatorial role. It seems rather embedded into the religious consciousness. And, of course, that's without access to divine revelation. So there's an awful lot about God, the moral life, the need for grace, and so forth, that can be known from natural reason. There are things in the faith that cannot be known immediately by reason, but that's different from saying that I make a leap of faith. That's different from saying that I make a leap of faith. And let me give you an illustration. Megan, do you know what I had for breakfast this morning?
No.
You don't know what I had for breakfast this morning. So reason and no amount of scientific investigation, unless you slice me open and look at my stomach contents, right, is going to reveal to you what I had for breakfast. But if I tell you that I had oatmeal, which, by the way, I did, okay, and you know enough about my character that you can reliably trust that I am a truth teller, then you can know, in a qualified sense, what I had for breakfast. You can know because you are relying on trustworthy testimony. All right, now, hold that thought, and I'm going to get you not to the other side of the leap of faith, but to the other side of this break in about a minute.
833-288-EWTN. Plenty of time for your phone calls at 833-288-3986. EWTN's open... How am I doing? Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
Father Benedict Groeschel.
No Catholic can support abortion, and that Catholics are responsible to take serious action against legalized abortion.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
For the Jews of old, the temple was the holiest place in the universe, and the spiritual center of the temple was the Holy of Holies. It was blocked off by a thick curtain, and only the high priest could enter to offer sacrifice to God. He had to have a rope tied around his ankle in case he died in there, so he could be dragged out because no one else was ever allowed in. I lead a pilgrimage to the Holy Land every year, and to this day, you can see Jewish people from around the world come to the Wailing Wall, the closest place to where the Holy of Holies was, just to touch that wall. When Jesus died, the curtain separating the Holy of Holies was torn in two, not from bottom to top, which man could have done, but in an act of God from top to bottom. Why? Because in the new covenant, God's dwelling place is you. You are the holiest place in the universe. Do you live like it? This is Chris Stefanik from RealLifeCatholic.com on EWTN Radio.
Have you heard about Church Pop? Church Pop features new online Christian content that's fun and inspiring every day. Find it on Snapchat, Instagram, and on the web at churchpop.com.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
Have you ever been so grief-stricken and so heart-sick that you can't see God? You can't see God in the tragedy. You can't see God in that cross. You can't see God in that sick. Why? You're enveloped in that grief. You're enveloped in fear. And God is out the window. You don't see Him standing right next to you.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Children get it.
They know how to enjoy the moment.
If we really listen to our children, we can learn some great spiritual lessons.
Share yours with us on Mondays, Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
Now let's return to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986.
You know, my friend Philip, dear friend Philip, I loves me some Philip. I really do. Love the whole family, the whole extended family. But he was watching on Facebook, and he typed in that we need better cue cards for me. The mistake Philip has made is assuming I can read. So that's the first place he falls short.
I'm
there.
touched that Philip's listening to the show. I know Philip Rimmer. He's a good man. Philip, thank you so much. Keep us in your prayers, would you?
They don't come any better. Absolutely. So we're talking to Megan in Dallas, Texas, who is dropping a little Kierkegaardian philosophy on you.
Yeah, thanks. So the question was, relationship of faith to reason. Reason gets us up to the starting point, and then faith leaps us over. Is that the way we have to think of it? Or it gets us up to the chasm, and then faith jumps over. Is that the way we think about the relationship between those two? Absolutely not. That's not the Catholic way at all. Catholic faith says there's a lot of the faith, like the existence of God, the moral life, the immateriality of the soul, and so forth, perhaps even the need for a mediator between God and man, that can all be discerned by natural reason. There are things in the faith that we cannot know from natural reason, but that is not to say that it requires a leap of faith as a kind of disregard of reason in order to exercise an act of faith or submission to those truths. And I gave you the example before the break that if I tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, it's not irrational of you to believe me. If you know that I'm a straight shooter and I have no reason to deceive you, and you're acquainted with me, you know I'm a reliable person, it's not irrational for you to believe me. It is, in fact, in a close relationship, like say my wife says to me, David, I need you to pick the kids up after school today. Well, reason cannot tell me that statement is true, that she has that need. All right? The only way I can know that she has that need is to rely on her credibility. But you know what? My wife's a credible person. She's proven herself credible to me. And so for me to say, you know what, I can't prove that statement to be true, so I'm not gonna yield my intellect to the statement that she needs me to pick the kids up. All right, that would be irrational. Not to believe my wife would be irrational, even though reason itself cannot prove that her statement is true. That's exactly the situation that we are in with regard to the so-called mysteries of the faith. Mysteries of the faith are things that reason cannot prove, but which it is reasonable to believe because they come to us through credible witnesses. Those would be things like the dogma of the Trinity or transubstantiation. Reason is never going to demonstrate the truth of the doctrine of transubstantiation, but reason can demonstrate that the one who taught it is reliable, that Jesus Christ is reliable, that he's trustworthy. And since Jesus taught this mysterious doctrine, we have grounds for believing what Jesus says, reasons for believing what Jesus says. And so our act of faith in divine revelation is not a mere leap. It's not a mere leap, but is a response to the rational motives for trusting that Christ is credible. And there's a whole branch of theology that deals with the motives of credibility, and they would enumerate things like the fulfillment of prophecy, miracles, especially the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, the influence of the church ethically, morally, scientifically on human culture as the kind of leaven in the dough or the mustard seed that Christ predicted would change the face of the world. You know, these are kinds of things that all point to the credibility of the church's claims about herself, so that we can receive those doctrines that transcend reason, but not operate in a way that's either contrary to reason and certainly not reducible to a so-called leap of faith. You know, we don't make the act of faith in a vacuum. I mean, leap of faith would be, you know, I could assert anything, and say, just make a leap of faith. You know, this fountain pen in front of me is like the celestial fountain pen from Alpha Centauri, and hold it under your nose, Jack, and you'll obtain eternal life. Exercise a leap of faith. Believe that. Well, you've got no motive to. You know, there's no coordinating or confirming evidence that would make my statement credible to you. That's not the position we're in with Catholicism at all.
Does that help you, Megan?
Very much. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We appreciate the phone call. That opens up a line for you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Next up is Fred in St. Charles, Missouri, listening on Covenant Radio. Fred, thanks for holding. You're on with Dr. Anders.
Hi, Dr. Anders. Hey, I wanted to, I'm a former Catholic who I belong to the Christian church now, but I used to be extremely upset with you, and the comment that you made about 15 minutes ago, even though you don't agree with Martin Luther, really changed my attitude about you and your program and about going against a person's conscience. And I wanted to compliment you for saying that. I think it took a lot of courage for you to say that. And, you know, your story is just the opposite of mine. You went from Protestantism to Catholicism. I did the opposite of what you did, but I had to follow my conscience. I mean, we could talk about these doctrinal issues from here to kingdom come, and we'll never come to the same conclusion. But I just wanted to say, and if you don't want to say anything, you don't have to, but I just wanted to just compliment you for having the courage to believe what your conscience believes. And I think you're doing a good job. And I believe that there's going to be Protestants, there's going to be Catholics in heaven, and we're all going to get this thing resolved someday. And The most important thing is we believe that Jesus Christ is the only way that a person can get to heaven. And all the other things, do they matter? They probably do. But, the main thing is the main thing, and it's Jesus. And that's really all I have to say. I want to thank you.
Fred, I appreciate the kind words. I really do. And I only disagree with one. Well, I'm only going to take issue. I'll put it that way. I'm only going to take issue with one thing that you said, and that is suggesting that I'm somehow courageous. I don't regard myself as a courageous person. The doctrine on the primacy of conscience is a Catholic doctrine. It's a Catholic doctrine. So simply because I'm Catholic, I believe in the primacy of conscience. So it doesn't take a lot of courage for me to line up behind what the Catholic Church says. I got 2,000 years of history behind me in doing so. But nevertheless, I appreciate the kind words. And I want to agree with you and commend you as well for having a generous attitude towards Catholics. And I also agree with you that when we get to heaven, I believe everybody who gets to heaven, but once they show up there, they're going to be Catholic. All right, that's my conviction, and I know you don't share that. That's fine. But I don't think you necessarily have to be Catholic to get in the door, right? And I've often cited the example of my Baptist grandfather who, Catholics are big on virtue ethics. We have big theology of the virtues and the moral life. I don't think my grandfather would have known what a virtue was if it bit him on the nose, but he had a lot more virtues than I do. He was a virtuous man, even though he probably could not have formulated a doctrine of virtue. And I asked one of my uncles one time, what did my grandfather do in his spare time? My uncle said he didn't have any spare time. He worked all the time to take care of his family. He was a man of enormous integrity and fairness and generosity and kind-heartedness. I believe because he was connected to Christ in an act of faith, all right, that Jesus had transformed him inwardly, made him into the image of Christ in Christ's likeness. Even though he wouldn't have given the same articulate expression to that faith that I would give today. But I'd rather have his virtues any day of the week.
Thanks, Fred. We appreciate the phone call, and we appreciate your kind words. Brenda's watching on Facebook, Dr. Andrews, and she says, what do you say to an Episcopalian who brags about women priests in her church?
Yeah, well, there's a kind of a technical answer to this question, and there's sort of a pastoral answer. The pastoral answer is you only say things to people in a mode where you think they might be disposed to listen. And there's an act of mercy Catholic Church recognizes called instructing the ignorant, or sometimes admonishing the sinner. They can be similar. And I'm not saying this woman's in sin, but this is an ignorant thing. But there's a principle in moral theology. When do you actually admonish somebody when they're wrong? Well, there's good answers to that. Number one, when it's serious. Number two, when they'll probably listen to you. And number three, when you're the person best situated to make that admonition. I find that those three criteria rarely line up in my life. And so I'm biting my tongue more often than not. And that happens within the church as well. I could give numerous examples. So I don't know that this woman probably is disposed to listen to me. Now, if she were disposed to listen to me, I would say, there are issues, wheels within wheels and issues within issues about this. There's a secular journalist, not Catholic as far as I know, female woman journalist, named Danielle Crittenden, who wrote a book a number of years ago called What Our Mothers Never Told Us. And the book is basically a lament of the lost opportunities that a certain version of feminism created in her life and the lives of other women. Because there's a model of feminism that suggests that equality and advancement for women in the modern world must mean that men and women do the same jobs in the same way for the same pay with the same motivations. And so it has tended to the creation of at least some people, not all women, but some women who think that in order to be authentically feminist, they have to be the CEO or the 80-hour-a-week corporate attorney, or the thoracic surgeon who spends 40 hours at a time on the floor of the surgery or whatever. And look, we can agree or disagree on the differences between men and women, but there's some biological differences that are pretty patently obvious, and one of them is that men don't bear children. And so if you're sold on that vision of femininity or feminism, it often means coming down to choosing between that kind of high-powered life and children, or that kind of high-powered life and raising your own children. And so Crittenden's lament points out that there is a generation of women in the world today who have passed their childbearing age and woken up and realized, I may have climbed the corporate ladder, but I'm lonely. And there's something in my nature that is unfulfilled because I naturally desire children. Now that's, the question of women clergy is a little bit remote from that. Except in this respect, the Catholic Church teaches that priests are fathers to the family that is the church. And they ought to model an authentic masculinity reformed in the charity of Christ, not a machismo kind of male domination, but the kind of servant leadership exhibited by somebody like your friend Father Wade that you were talking. When I meet Father Wade, I'm like, man, he's a man's man. He's a masculine guy, but he's sacrificed himself for the sake of Christ's body, the church, and the ministry of mercy. That kind of authentic masculinity, so that the priests can help men be men and women be women, not in the way the world says, maybe machismo men are abusive to women. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the kind of authentic servant, lay down your life for your bride, which is the church, for your bride, which is your bride, kind of masculinity that Christ embodied. And statistically, as it were, when you fill the priesthood with women, you lose those men to the faith. You lose those men to the faith. You lose those kinds of fathers in families. And that's a great loss, because when it comes to building that faith and those virtues in family life, the data are clear. Where the father goes, the children follow 96% of the time. And why is that? I'm not going to get into all that, but it's just a fact. Do you want to raise those kind of servant leadership men in your home? Then you better have those kind of servant fathers leading them in the church. It's just enough said.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. Plenty of time for your calls at 833-288-3986. There's a lot of information out there available on the interweb net, as they say. Some of it good, some of it bad. I've got a great alternative for you to find. Some people like, variety is the spice of life. Some people like news stories. Some people like editorials. Some people like blogs, opinion pieces. We've got a place here at EWTN where we have compiled all the best of those Catholic entities, or those entities from a Catholic perspective, and it's Catholic News Agency. So I'd encourage you to check it out today, CatholicNewsAgency.com. Next up, Alexandria, Virginia. Stephanie is in Alexandria listening to Guadalupe Radio. Stephanie, you're on with Dr. Anders.
Oh, hi, Dr. Anders. Thanks for taking the call. I just have a question regarding the church's stance on male circumcision, like for infants, where it stands.
Sure, thank you. It would depend on the reason that one circumcised one's child. If you are circumcising your child because you believe that this is in his best interest in terms of his physical health, or maybe, all the males in his family are circumcised, you don't want him to feel like the outsider, you have some sort of therapeutic reason that motivates the decision, that's okay. If your purpose in circumcising the child is born out of a Jewish conception that this is a necessary obligation in order for the child to be counted a member of God's family, then that is not allowable, all right? And in fact, the book of Galatians in the New Testament was written largely to refute that false notion. Gentiles do not have to circumcise their children in order for them to be acceptable to God. So if that's your motive, then you have to back up and rethink what it means to be a Catholic Christian. Again, if it's a therapeutic, medical, or social reason, then that's okay.
You understand the distinction, Stephanie?
I do. Thank you so much. That means everything. Thank you.
Okay, God bless you. We appreciate the phone call. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. Next up is Jane. She's in Springfield, Illinois, watching us on Facebook Live. Hi, Jane. What's your question for Dr. Anders?
Hi. My question is, why does it seem that Catholic countries seem to have more corruption and are poorer than the Protestant settled USA?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So, first of all, I don't have enough accurate demographic data, to compare the life outcomes and the GDP and so forth across the multiplicity of factors that would play into that, okay? But let's talk a little bit about the material success of the United States, specifically, the pluses and the pros and cons of that, and the historical origins of that. I don't know if you're a reader, but there's a book I'd love for you to read one day by a Catholic theologian named John Courtney Murray. The title of the book is We Hold These Truths, and it is an analysis of the American proposition, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, individual dignity, rights, property rights, and so forth, as the foundation of American prosperity, and the origin of these ideas in Catholic thinking. Okay, so at least from where I'm sitting, a lot of what explains America's success in the world is born out of the moral doctrines embedded in the English common law tradition. Now, English common law evolved in a Catholic regime, and it embodies Catholic moral principles. All right, let me just give you one tiny little illustration of that fact. One of the things that makes for any kind of stable economy or successful economy is a stable judicial system, stable judiciary. One of the bedrocks of our judiciary is the principle of reasonable doubt in criminal cases. You can't convict somebody unless you're sure beyond a reasonable doubt that they're in fact guilty, and judged by a jury of their peers. Where does that idea come from? It does not come from the Bible. The Bible never articulates the standard of reasonable doubt in judicial proceedings. Okay, and historically, like the earliest Protestant countries and regimes, like say for example Geneva, Switzerland, would use judicial torture. Protestant countries would use judicial torture in order to extract confessions. Okay, the Catholic Church opposed that kind of thing. It was the Catholic Church way back in the 13th century that opposed, for instance, trials by ordeal, all right, formulated a doctrine of the dignity of the individual conscience and against forced confession in criminal proceedings. And the standard of reasonable doubt actually emerged out of the Catholic principle that jurors should be able to answer in conscience to God if they pass a capital sentence against somebody accused of a crime. So that was a lot of background in legal theory, but it's just one illustration of how, so one of the bedrocks of America's success, grounded in our legal system, is actually born out of principles of Catholic moral theology that go way back into the Middle Ages. And the way those things get instantiated in the common law tradition is, of course, different from the way they played out in the Napoleonic Code or in more statutory regimes. But it's integral to the way contract law, laws against trespass and property rights and so forth, all those things are integral to the success of the United States, and their origins are effectively Catholic. Okay? And I could sort of take you through the American regime and the American economy point by point and illustrate some of these principles and their Catholic origins. So I think it's a bit artificial to just say Catholic over here, Protestant over there. And the expression, there is no such thing as a Catholic, there's no such thing as the Catholic culture. There are Catholic cultures, and some of them are more or less successful, more or less corrupt, more or less efficient. One of the things I note about many of the countries that were bedrocks of the Reformation in the 16th century, whether you look at Switzerland, whether you look at Germany, whether you look at the Calvinist regions of France, whether you look at Holland, of course Scandinavia was widely Protestant as well. These are the most secular countries in Europe. Overwhelmingly the most secular countries in Europe. Those most likely to participate in things like euthanasia, gross offenses against human dignity, born specifically out of a deformed moral philosophy. This was the bedrock of the Reformation. And if you look at, say, England, okay, which obviously left the church en masse, who are most of the church-going Christians in England today? It's Catholics. Catholic Church in England is, well, I won't say it's vibrant, but compared to the Church of England, it's going strong. Okay, and what's happening to America, or has happened to America, as America has tended to depart from those elements of Catholic moral thinking that were embedded in our own legal codes, well, looks to me like judicial theory and so forth is moving much more in the direction of statutory versus common law, and a far more authoritarian judiciary, and things that perhaps there's not a strong conception of human dignity, the dignity of conscience, and so forth. So what will that mean down the road? Now, we could talk for hours about capitalism. You know who invented capitalism, Jack? It was Benedictine monks.
Right.
1,000 years ago, we began to see the theoretical developments of a capitalist economy in the Benedictine monasteries. All right.
Sold beer.
But sold beer, sure. And but the Catholics have a very nuanced understanding about the way economies ought to function. And one of the principles that guides Catholic economic thinking is something called subsidiarity, which means that as often as possible, the lowest order of society, the family, the parish, the church, the local community, ought to be the bearer of sovereignty or of economic activity. And an unfettered capitalism may in fact advance your GDP, but one of the unintended consequences will be radical disparity between the wealthiest of the wealthy and the poorest of the poor. That's happening in the United States, by the way, not just in economic disparity, but the cultural divide between the haves and the have-nots, the culture, the mentality, the ethical convictions between the haves and the have-nots, radically different. And you know what happens at the upper ends of that economic spectrum? It's not friendly towards religion. It's not friendly towards children. It's not friendly towards family. It's not friendly towards marriage. And so the growth in the United States GDP, which I participate in and I'm grateful for, is a mixed bag and is not the only metric that we should use to judge the flourishing of a society.
Fred is watching on YouTube, and he wants your 1-minute answer on what Marian dogmas are Catholics required to believe.
You want a list? Okay, well, don't shoot me if I miss one. Okay, let's start. Mary is the second Eve. Mary is perpetually virgin. Mary gave birth virginally to Christ. That goes into that. Okay, Mary is sinless and impeccable. Mary is immaculately conceived. Mary was assumed bodily into heaven. Am I missing any?
That's pretty thorough, I think.
All right. Okay. Yeah. I think that nails it. If I missed one, you can let me know.
Okay. Well, I'm sure somebody will research it, and if you have,
right, exactly,
they'll let us know. Thanks so much for another great week.
Hey, thanks, Jack. My pleasure. Thanks for being with me.
And everybody can feel confident coming back on Monday because Tom will be here.
It was fun.
And he'll even know what show he's on.
It gave us some comedic diversion.
On behalf of our host, Dr. David Anders, our producer, Michael Birchfield, call screener, Matt Gubensky, and our social media maven, Mr. Jeff Burson, I'm Jack Williams. Thanks for letting me sit in a little couple days here at the end of the week. Back at it on Monday with Tom Price. Until then, God bless.